His lawyer leaned in close and whispered 5 words, just 5 words. You just signed the debt. Vincent's smug face, the one I had been forced to stare at across the breakfast table for 15 years in our Virginia mansion, suddenly turned as pale as a corpse. The fingers that used to wear my wedding ring, now clutching an expensive Mont Blanc pen, began to tremble violently. The property transfer papers he had been so desperate to seize now looked like a death sentence in his hands. The entire courtroom held its breath. And me? For the first time after 3 years of enduring the scorn of being called a rough female soldier, I smiled. It was the cold smile of a sniper who just watched the target step into the trap. But I am moving too fast. You need to understand how a logistics sergeant, despised by her husband, could orchestrate such a brutal endgame. My name is Heidi Foster. I am 34 years old, a sergeant in the United States Army. And until 3 months ago, I was the wife of the paper billionaire, Vincent Mercer. It all started not in a courtroom, but on a terrible Tuesday evening, when Vincent decided to declare war on the only person who knew exactly how much money he owed. I dragged my boots across the threshold, my body screaming after a 12-hour shift at the Fort Belvoir logistics warehouse. My shoulders ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm, the familiar souvenir of hauling heavy crates of equipment all day. All I wanted, all I could visualize in my exhausted mind, was a mug of hot tea and the sight of my son, Tyler. I needed that normalcy. I needed to wash the smell of hydraulic fluid and diesel off my skin. But when I walked into the kitchen, the heart of the home I had paid the mortgage on for 11 years, warmth was not what greeted me. The air was thick, choking on the scent of Chanel No. 5. It overpowered the smell of dinner, invading my nostrils like a chemical weapon. Brittany, Vincent's 27-year-old mistress, was standing there. She was wearing my floral apron. She was pressing buttons on my Breville espresso machine. She turned around, flashing a smile that was too bright, too practiced. She looked at me like she was the lady of the manor, and I was the hired help coming in through the service entrance. "Oh, you're home," she chirped, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She gestured to the trash can. "I accidentally dropped that chipped mug of yours. It looked so old and dirty anyway. I did you a favor." I stared at the trash. My favorite mug, the one Tyler had painted for me in kindergarten, lay in jagged pieces. Before I could even process the rage rising in my throat, the atmosphere shifted. Vincent walked in. He was holding a glass of red wine, swirling it with that pretentious wrist flick he had picked up from his investor friends at Tyson's Corner. He didn't look me in the eye. Instead, his gaze swept over my stained Army combat uniform with unfiltered disgust. "Sign it, Heidi." He tossed a thick manila folder onto the granite island. It landed with a heavy slap. Divorce papers. "I want everything," he said, his voice calm, detached. "The house, the cars, the business equity. Look at yourself, Heidi. You look more like a man than a woman. A man needs softness. A man needs peace. Brittany brings that energy into this house. You just bring home the smell of engine grease." He spoke about me like I was a piece of expired inventory. He stood there in his least luxury, forgetting that it was my engine grease paycheck that had covered the mortgage when his real estate deals went south. Not once, but 3 times. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a punch. I turned to the kitchen table, seeking the only ally I had left. "Tyler!" My voice cracked, betraying me. My 12-year-old son was sitting there, hunched over. He was glued to a brand new iPhone Pro Max, the exact model I had told him he wasn't old enough for yet. He didn't look up. His thumbs tapped furiously on the screen. "Tyler, what do you think about this?" I asked, desperation creeping in. He finally looked up, but not at me. He looked at Vincent, then at Brittany. "Dad is right, Mom," he mumbled, shrinking into his hoodie. "You're always so strict. You run this house like a boot camp. It's more fun with Brittany. She lets me game as much as I want." The sound of my heart breaking was louder than any explosion I had heard on the range. Vincent hadn't just betrayed me, he had bought my son. He had traded a shiny gadget for a boy's loyalty, turning my own child into an accomplice. "You need to sleep downstairs." Vincent commanded, checking his watch. Brittany isn't comfortable sleeping in a guest room. She needs the master suite. That night, I found myself exiled to the living room sofa. This was the sofa I'd reupholstered myself to save money 5 years ago. I pulled a thin, scratchy military-issue wool blanket up to my chin. The house was dark, but I couldn't close my eyes. From upstairs, from my bedroom, from my marriage bed, I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter. Their happiness was a direct insult to my existence. Lying there, staring at the ceiling fan cutting through the shadows, the tears didn't come. Tears are for people who still have hope that things might go back to normal. I had no hope. My breathing slowed. The exhaustion from the warehouse faded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I thought about the soldier's creed. I will never leave a fallen comrade. But there is another unspoken rule in warfare. Identify the threat. Neutralize the threat. Vincent thought he had broken me. He thought he was dealing with an emotional, discarded wife. He forgot who I was. He forgot that while he played business in air-conditioned offices, I managed millions of dollars of assets in high-stress environments. I listened to the laughter upstairs one last time. Roger that, I thought, my mind locking into place like a bolt in a rifle. Target acquired. Tonight, Vincent Mercer wasn't my husband anymore. He was just an enemy combatant. And he had no idea he had just declared war on a logistics expert. The next morning, the air inside Panera Bread smelled of roasted coffee and fresh sourdough, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of my own home the night before. I sat in a booth by the window, clutching a paper cup of dark roast as if it were a lifeline. Across from me sat Diane Holloway. We had been best friends for 20 years, ever since our sophomore year of high school. We had survived bad breakups, my deployments to Iraq, and the birth of our children together. If there was anyone in the world I could trust with the wreckage of my life, it was her. Or so I thought. I poured everything out. I told her about Brittany wearing my apron. I told her about Vincent's cruel ultimatum and how Tyler, my own son, had looked at me with strangers' eyes. My voice shook, and I didn't bother wiping the tears that leaked onto my cheeks. I was raw. I was vulnerable. Diane reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her eyes were shimmering with what looked like tears. "Oh, Heidi, you poor thing," she cooed, her voice dripping with sympathy. "That is just awful. But, you know Vincent. He's a powerful man. He has that shark mentality. Maybe you should just let him win this one." I blinked, confused. Let him win? Diane, he wants to leave me with nothing. I know, honey, she sighed, withdrawing her hand to take a sip of her iced green tea. But fighting him? You will only get hurt. You don't have his resources. Maybe it is better to just sign the papers, move into a small apartment, and start fresh. For your mental health. Her advice sounded rational, almost caring. But something was off. Throughout our entire conversation, Diane's eyes kept darting down to her phone. It was placed face down on the table next to her napkin holder. Every time it vibrated against the wood, she would flinch, glance at me, and then quickly check the screen under the table before placing it face down again. I brushed it off. I was too exhausted to be paranoid. That afternoon, I drove back to the house during my lunch break to grab more clothes. The house was empty. Vincent was at the office, and Brittany was likely out spending his money. I walked into the kitchen and saw the family iPad sitting on the marble island. Tyler must have left it there. It was the shared device we used for recipes and games. I went to move it to the charging station when the screen lit up. A notification. My heart stopped. It was a blue iMessage bubble. The sender's name was clear as day. Diane H. The message wasn't for me. It was for Vincent. The preview on the lock screen read, "I just met with her at Panera. She is a total mess, crying her eyes out. She is weak right now. If you press for full custody of the kid, she will cave and sign the asset waiver. Just stay aggressive. Also, don't forget to transfer my fee as we discussed." The world tilted on its axis. I grabbed the edge of the counter to keep from falling. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was an execution. Memories flooded my brain, hot and fast. I thought back to 5 years ago, in the dead of winter. Diane had called me at 2 in the morning, sobbing because her ex-husband had beaten her black and blue and thrown her out into the snow. I didn't hesitate. I drove through a blizzard to pick her up. I was the one who loaned her $5,000 from my personal savings, money I had scraped together from extra shifts, so she could put a deposit on a rental apartment. She never paid me back a single cent. I never asked. When she went to rehab for her pill addiction, I was the one who picked her daughter up from school every day for 3 months. I fed her, clothed her, and made sure she didn't feel abandoned. And this was my repayment? She was selling me out to Vincent, a man she had secretly envied for 15 years because she thought he was a high-value catch, for a few $1,000s and a seat at his table. My kindness hadn't just been wasted, it had been weaponized against me. If you have ever had a friend stab you in the back when you needed them most, I need you to pause right now. Hit that like button and comment "I'm with Heidi" below. Let me know I am not fighting this battle alone. I stared at the iPad. My first instinct was to smash it against the granite. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call Diane and unleash 20 years of rage on her. But I stopped. I took a deep breath, inhaling the lingering scent of Britney's perfume that still hung in the air. I closed my eyes and let the sad wife die. When I opened them, the logistics sergeant was back in command. In warfare, information is life. And right now, Diane wasn't just a traitor, she was a leak. She was a direct line of communication to the enemy commander. If Vincent thought I was weak, he would be careless. If he thought I was surrendering, he would leave his flanks unguarded. I gently placed the iPad back exactly where I found it. I pulled out my own phone and composed a text to Diane. My fingers didn't tremble. "You are right, Diane," I typed. "I am so tired. I don't think I can fight him. I think I'm going to agree to all of Vincent's demands just to get some peace. Thank you for listening to me today." I hit send. 3 dots appeared instantly. Then, a reply popped up. A sad face emoji with a single tear. "Poor baby, be strong. I'm always here for you." I stared at the screen and let out a short, cold laugh. It was the sound of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Diane thought she was playing me. She had no idea she had just become my greatest asset. She would feed Vincent exactly the lies I wanted him to hear. She would lull him into a false sense of security. And while he was busy celebrating his victory, I would be preparing my counterattack. The double agent had just been compromised, and she didn't even know it. The game was on. That evening, the house was silent. But the air still felt heavy with the ghosts of Vincent and Brittany's laughter. I watched from the window as Vincent's leased Mercedes pulled out of the driveway. They were headed to Ruth's Chris Steakhouse to celebrate their imminent victory and my supposed surrender. I checked my watch. Based on Tyson's corner traffic and Vincent's tendency to order expensive wine to show off, I had exactly 2 hours. 120 minutes. For a civilian, that is a dinner break. For a logistics sergeant, that is enough time to dismantle an empire. I moved to the heavy oak door of Vincent's home office. He called it his war room. He had forbidden me from entering this room for years, claiming it contained sensitive proprietary information. He had even installed a biometric lock on the handle last month. He thought he was secure. He thought he was clever. But Vincent had a fatal flaw common among arrogant men. He was lazy. I walked over to the fake potted ficus plant in the hallway corner. I lifted the plastic pot. There, taped to the bottom, was the emergency override key. It was a breach of security so amateur it would have gotten a private on basic training duty reprimanded. I slid the key into the lock. The tumbler clicked. I was in. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and secrets. I didn't waste a second. I sat down at his massive mahogany desk, a desk that cost more than my first car, and booted up his iMac. While it loaded, I pulled a military-grade encrypted USB drive from my pocket. Vincent saw a tired wife. He forgot he was dealing with a woman whose job was to track millions of dollars in government assets across war zones. Auditing was not just my job, it was my art form. The password prompt appeared. I didn't panic. I knew my husband. I tried his birthday. Incorrect. I tried his mother's name. Incorrect. Then, with a sneer of disgust, I typed in 6 digits. 040996. April 9th, 1996. Brittany's birthday. The screen unlocked. Pathetic, I whispered. I immediately bypassed his desktop clutter and went straight for the jugular. His QuickBooks accounting software. He kept it logged in. Another security violation. I began to scroll, and as the data filled the screen, the picture of a successful real estate mogul dissolved into pixels of red ink. The numbers were not just bad, they were catastrophic. The wealth Vincent flaunted was a mirage. I pulled up his American Express Platinum statement. Balance due, $45,000. It was all past due. I clicked on the tax folder. A scanned letter from the IRS popped up, dated 2 weeks ago. Notice of intent to levy. He owed $120,000 in back taxes for his shell company, Mercer Holdings. But the real horror was the house. I navigated to the mortgage status. My breath hitched. He had taken out a home equity line of credit, a HELOC against the house 6 months ago. He had maxed it out completely. The equity I'd built up over a decade of mortgage payments was gone. The house was leveraged to the hilt. It was underwater. Vincent didn't own anything. He was drowning in an ocean of debt, keeping afloat only by shuffling credit cards and maintaining appearances. I was copying the files to my USB drive when I saw a transaction that made my blood run cold. It was dated 3 days ago. A transfer of $15,000. The source account was labeled Tyler 529 College Plan. My hand froze on the mouse. That was the account I had set up when Tyler was born. It was money meant for his tuition, his books, his future. It was sacred. I traced the destination of the funds. The transaction detail read, Hermes, Tyson's Galleria. The room seemed to spin. He hadn't just borrowed money, he had looted our son's future. He had drained $15,000, years of savings, to buy a Birkin bag for a 27-year-old mistress who didn't even know how to load a dishwasher. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring not with tears, but with a white-hot rage that started in my chest and radiated to my fingertips. I wanted to smash the screen. I wanted to burn this office to the ground. But I forced my hand to relax. I took a deep, tactical breath. Inhale, exhale. Rage is a wasted emotion in the field. Rage makes you sloppy. I needed to be a sniper, not a brawler. I looked at the glowing numbers one last time. Vincent wanted a divorce. He wanted to take everything. He wanted the house. He wanted the business. He wanted the lifestyle. A cold, terrifying smile spread across my face. Okay, Vincent, I thought. You can have it. If he took the assets, he took the liabilities. If he fought for the house, he fought for the underwater mortgage. If he claimed the business, he claimed the IRS tax liens. He was so blinded by greed and arrogance that he hadn't bothered to read the fine print of his own life. I finished the data transfer and ejected the USB drive. I wiped my fingerprints from the keyboard and the desk surface. I locked the door and placed the key back under the plastic plant, exactly slightly crooked as I had found it. I walked back to the living room and sat in the dark, clutching the USB drive in my hand like a grenade. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the architect of his destruction. Roger that, I whispered into the silence of the empty house. Target acquired. The weekend arrived with the humidity of a Virginia summer, thick and suffocating. I pulled my truck into the driveway, dreading what I would find inside, but nothing could have prepared me for the scene in the open garage. Lorraine, Vincent's mother, was standing there. She was a woman who wore pearls to the grocery store and looked at anyone earning less than 6 figures as if they were a different species. She was currently holding a large, heavy-duty black trash bag. My stomach dropped. Sticking out of the top of the bag wasn't yard waste or old newspapers. It was the digital camouflage pattern of my Army combat uniforms. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Lorraine didn't even look up. She reached onto the workbench and picked up a wooden display case. My breath hitched. That case held my Army commendation medals and the ribbons I'd earned over 3 deployments. They represented years of sweat, blood, and time away from my son. "Oh, hello, Heidi," she said, her tone breezy. "I am helping Brittany reorganize. The poor girl needs space for her handbag collection, and this garage is full of clutter." Before I could move, she tossed the wooden case into the blue recycling bin. It hit the plastic with a sickening clatter, sounding no different than an empty beer can being discarded. "Honestly," she sniffed, wiping her hands on a towel, "these cheap metal trinkets look so tacky. They ruin the aesthetic of the display cabinet." Blood rushed to my face, hot and violent. My hands curled into fists at my sides. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her by her cashmere sweater and tell her what those trinkets actually cost. But I didn't. I bit my lips so hard I tasted the copper tang of blood. "Not yet," I told myself. "Hold the line." "You are right, Lorraine," I forced out, my voice trembling slightly. "Brittany needs the space." If the morning was an insult, the afternoon was a public execution. Vincent had decided to host a backyard barbecue for his business partners and friends. It was a power move. He insisted I stay and help, framing it as us being civil co-parents. In reality, he wanted a servant. The backyard was filled with the smell of expensive Wagyu beef on the grill and the sound of ice clinking in glasses. I moved through the crowd wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, carrying a tray of microbrews, while Brittany held court in a white sundress, laughing too loudly at jokes she didn't understand. Vincent wrapped an arm around Brittany's waist, pulling her close as he addressed a circle of men in suits who had loosened their ties. "You guys know Heidi," Vincent said, gesturing to me with his drink as I offered a beer to a man on his left. "She is a good soldier, really. Great at following orders. But she doesn't know the first thing about being a woman. A man needs softness, right? Heidi. She is just strict functionality." The group erupted in laughter. It was a boys' club laugh, dismissive and cruel. I stood there, the tray heavy in my hands, my face burning. I lowered my head, hiding the fire in my eyes. "Yes," I said softly. "Vincent has always been the commander." A man named Greg, one of Vincent's real estate buddies, stepped in front of me. He was wearing a gold Rolex that caught the afternoon sun, a flashy symbol of money he probably didn't actually have. "Hey, Heidi," he sneered, grabbing a beer without saying thank you. "I heard military pay is pretty garbage. You must feel lucky you snagged a guy like Vincent to pay the bills for the last decade, huh? Must be nice to have a free ride." The irony was so sharp, it almost made me laugh. He didn't know that my garbage military salary was the only consistent income we had. He didn't know that my steady paycheck had bailed out Vincent's company from bankruptcy 3 separate times. He didn't know that when Vincent's appendix burst 2 years ago, it was my TRICARE insurance that covered the $40,000 hospital bill because Vincent had let his own policy lapse. I looked at his gold watch, then at Vincent's smug face. "Yes," I said, my smile tight and thin. "I am very lucky." Their ignorance wasn't an insult anymore. It was my armor. It was the perfect American camouflage. They saw a weak, dependent wife. They didn't see the predator lying in wait. The party finally wound down as the sun set. I was in the kitchen, scraping plates into the disposal, when Tyler walked in. He stood in the doorway, watching me. I waited for him to say goodnight, to maybe apologize for ignoring me earlier. "Mom," he said, his voice dripping with 12-year-old disdain. "Why are you such a coward?" I froze, a dirty plate in my hand. "Excuse me?" "Dad and Grandma threw away your stuff. They made fun of you in front of everyone, and you just stood there taking orders like a servant." He shook his head, looking at me with pure disappointment. "You let them walk all over you. You make me ashamed." He turned and stormed out before I could answer. The words cut deeper than Lorraine's insults or Vincent's mockery. My own son thought I was weak. He thought I had surrendered. I gripped the edge of the sink, staring out the window at the darkness. It took every ounce of discipline I possessed not to run after him and scream the truth. But I couldn't. Not yet. He was right about one thing. A soldier doesn't fire when they are angry. They don't fire just to make noise. They wait. They wait until the enemy is so confident, so exposed, that they walk right into the crosshairs. They wait until they can see the whites of their eyes. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Tomorrow was court day. Vincent thought he had won. He thought I was broken, humiliated, and defeated. He would go into that courtroom expecting a lamb. He had no idea he was about to lock himself in a cage with a lion. I needed a shark. In Washington, D.C., you don't look for justice. You look for leverage. I found my leverage in the form of Nina Castellano. They called her the swamp shark for a reason. Her office on K Street smelled of expensive leather and intimidation. She didn't offer me tea or sympathy. She simply plugged the encrypted USB drive I'd stolen from Vincent's office into her laptop and started reading. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was the clicking of her mouse. Then, she stopped. She pushed her black-rimmed glasses up her nose and looked at me with a terrifying glint in her eyes. "Jesus, Heidi," she exhaled, a slow smile spreading across her face. "This isn't a divorce file. This is a financial murder scene." She tapped the screen where Vincent's debts were glowing in red. He's drowning, and he doesn't even know the water is over his head yet. He's dead. But to make sure he stays dead, we need to make him greedy. 3 days later, we met at the mediation center. I spent an hour preparing for this performance. I didn't wear my uniform, and I certainly didn't wear anything that looked put together. I dug out an old, pilling gray sweater from the back of my closet. I rubbed my eyes until they were red and puffy. And I kept a crumpled tissue clutched in my hand like a white flag of surrender. When I walked into the conference room, Vincent was already there. He was leaning back in his chair, whispering to his lawyer, Harold, a man who charged $600 an hour to help rich men hide their assets. Vincent looked at me, then at my sweater, and smirked. He saw exactly what he wanted to see, a broken woman. We sat down. The air conditioning was humming, cold and sterile. "Let's make this quick," Vincent said, checking his watch. "I have a flight to book." I took a shaky breath, keeping my eyes on the table. "Vincent, I let my voice crack perfectly. I am so tired. I can't fight you anymore. You win." Harold narrowed his eyes, sensing a trap, but Vincent just puffed out his chest. "I don't want the house," I continued, dabbing my eyes with the tissue. "I don't want the business. I don't want the cars. You can have everything." The room went silent. Harold started to scribble furiously on his notepad, but Vincent's eyes widened. "Everything?" Vincent asked. "Yes," I whispered. "I just want $50,000 in cash so I can rent a small apartment. And I want visitation rights for Tyler on the weekends. You can have primary custody. I can't afford to raise him right now." Saying those words about my son felt like swallowing broken glass. Giving up 50-50 custody was the biggest gamble of my life. But I knew Vincent. If I fought for Tyler, he would fight for the assets just to spite me. If I gave up Tyler, he would think he had completely crushed me. Vincent's phone buzzed on the mahogany table. It buzzed again and again. He glanced at the screen. I knew who it was without looking. It was Brittany. She had been posting stories all morning about luxury villas in Cabo San Lucas. She was pushing him. She wanted the divorce finalized so they could jet off to Mexico and spend money they didn't have. Vincent looked at the text, then at me, then at the clock. The impatience was radiating off him in waves. He saw an easy victory. He saw a vacation. He saw a future where he kept his empire and got rid of his boring wife in one afternoon. "Harold," Vincent snapped. "Draft it up. She surrenders. We take it all." "Vincent, wait," Harold hissed, putting a hand on Vincent's arm. "This is too easy. We haven't audited the marital assets properly. If we take everything as a block package, we need to be sure about the liabilities attached to the property titles. We should run a full title search and credit check." Vincent pulled his arm away, annoyed. "I know my own assets, Harold. I am a real estate investor. She is just a logistics clerk. She doesn't know the first thing about business. She is just quitting because she is weak." He turned to me, his eyes cold and devoid of any humanity. You are pathetic, Heidi, but fine. If you want to walk away with nothing, I will let you. Nina slid the document across the table. It was the marital settlement agreement. It stated clearly, in black and white, that Vincent Mercer was assuming sole ownership of the family residence, the business entities known as Mercer Holdings, and all associated vehicles. It also stated, in standard legal boilerplate that Vincent didn't bother to read, that the sole owner assumes all associated financial encumbrances, debts, and tax liabilities attached to said assets. Vincent pulled a heavy Mont Blanc pen from his suit pocket, the pen I had bought him for our 10th anniversary. He didn't read the pages. He just flipped to the back. "Harold, stop worrying," Vincent muttered as his lawyer tried to intervene one last time. "I am signing." He pressed the nib to the paper. Scritch, scratch. The sound of his signature was loud in the quiet room. It was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping, and he was the one pulling the lever. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. I had to look down at my lap to hide the cold, predatory smile that was fighting to break through my mask of tears. He wasn't just signing a divorce paper. He was signing a confession. He was voluntarily taking on nearly $2 million in debt. He capped the pen and slid the papers back to Nina with a smug grin. "Done," he said. "Pleasure doing business with you, Heidi." I stood up, clutching my old purse. "Goodbye, Vincent." I walked out of the room with my head down, looking defeated. But as soon as the elevator doors closed, cutting off his view, I straightened my spine. I wiped the fake tears from my face. The ambush was successful. The trap was sprung. Now, all I had to do was wait for the judge to read the verdict. The morning of the hearing, the gray pilling sweater I'd worn to the mediation office lay in a heap on the floor of my rental apartment. That woman, the weak, defeated, weeping wife, was gone. She had served her purpose. Today, Sergeant Heidi Foster was reporting for duty. I stood before the mirror and buttoned my jacket. It was the Army service uniform, the dress blues. The midnight blue fabric was immaculate, tailored to fit perfectly. I fastened my buttons with precision. On my left breast, I pinned the rack of ribbons and medals that Vincent's mother had called cheap metal trinkets. The Army Commendation Medals, the Good Conduct Medal, the campaign stars. They gleamed under the lights, heavy with history and honor. I pulled my hair back into a regulation bun, tight and severe. I put on my high-gloss shoes. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a victim. I saw a soldier preparing for the final strike. When I pushed open the double doors of the courtroom, the air shifted. Vincent was sitting at the plaintiff's table, looking bored. Brittany was sitting in the gallery directly behind him, holding her phone up discreetly. I knew she was live streaming to her Instagram followers, probably captioning it Freedom Day or something equally vapid. But when I walked down the center aisle, the clicking of my heels echoing on the floor tiles, Brittany lowered her phone. Vincent turned around to sneer at me, but the expression died on his face. He blinked, disoriented. He was expecting the broken woman in the gray sweater. Instead, he was staring at a decorated, non-commissioned officer of the United States Army. The gold stripes on my sleeves caught the light. The medals on my chest announced exactly who I was. For a split second, I saw it. A shiver of genuine fear ran through him. It was the primal reaction of a man realizing he had severely underestimated his opponent. I took my seat next to Nina. She looked at me, winked, and opened her briefcase. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. The Honorable Patricia Holden swept into the room. She was a judge known for zero tolerance for nonsense. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and picked up the marital settlement agreement. "We are here to finalize the divorce of Mercer versus Foster," Judge Holden said, her voice dry and authoritative. "I have reviewed the settlement agreement signed by both parties." She looked over her spectacles at Vincent. "Mr. Mercer, your counsel has indicated that you wish to waive a full financial audit to expedite this process. Is that correct?" Vincent stood up, buttoning his expensive Italian suit jacket. "Yes, Your Honor. I know my assets. I just want to get this over with." "Very well," the judge continued, flipping a page. "According to this agreement, you are claiming sole ownership of the marital residence in Virginia, the entirety of the business known as Mercer Holdings, and all luxury vehicles listed in Schedule A." You are leaving Miss Foster with a one-time cash payment of $50,000. That is correct, Your Honor, Vincent said, his voice booming with confidence. He cast a triumphant look at me. I built this empire. It belongs to me. Judge Holden paused. She looked at the paper, then at Vincent, then at me. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, maybe pity, maybe amusement. Mr. Mercer, she said, her tone dropping an octave. You understand that under Virginia law, and specifically stated in Addendum B of this contract you signed, the transfer of asset ownership includes the full assumption of all attached liabilities and debts. Vincent waved his hand dismissively. Yes, the mortgage. I can handle the mortgage. Let's move on. It is not just a mortgage, Mr. Mercer. The judge said sharply. I am looking at the updated title search and lien report attached to this file. She began to read, and the room temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. The residence has a primary mortgage, but it also has a fully drawn home equity line of credit with a balance of $1.1 million. Vincent froze. Furthermore, the judge continued, relentless, Mercer Holdings has 3 active federal tax liens from the IRS for unpaid payroll and income taxes, totaling $120,000. There is also a personal unsecured debt load across 6 credit accounts, totaling $200,000. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had just detonated right before the shockwave hits. Judge Holden looked directly at Vincent. Mr. Mercer, you have fought for and successfully claimed a total asset package that has a net worth of negative $1.9 million. She removed her glasses. Congratulations, sir. You have won the debt. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then, chaos. Vincent's face went from a confident tan to the color of paper. He swayed on his feet, gripping the table for support. He whipped his head around to stare at his lawyer. What? Vincent choked out, his voice high and strangled. Harold, what is she talking about? What tax liens? Harold, his lawyer, didn't even stand up. He just closed his eyes and shook his head. I told you to audit the books, Vincent. I told you. You signed the waiver. In the gallery, Brittany gasped. The color drained from her face faster than it had from Vincent's. She realized in that instant that there was no Cabo trip. There was no mansion. There was no money. She frantically tapped her phone screen, ending the live stream before her followers could hear that her millionaire boyfriend was actually destitute. No, Vincent screamed, losing all composure. He pointed a shaking finger at me across the aisle. She set me up. That bitch set me up. She cooked the books. If you are cheering right now because you love seeing a narcissist get exactly what he deserves, hit that like button and comment, "Justice served" below. Let's show Vincent that the world is watching. Order. Judge Holden banged her gavel, the sound cracking like a gunshot through the room. Order in this court. She tricked me, Vincent yelled, his eyes bulging. I rescind. I take it back. You will do no such thing, Judge Holden commanded, her voice like steel. You signed a legal document against the advice of your own counsel. You stood before me and confirmed it. The court does not protect you from your own arrogance, Mr. Mercer. She slammed the gavel down one final time. The divorce is final. The assets and the debts are yours. Court is adjourned. Vincent collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He looked small. He looked ruined. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had reaped what he sowed. I stood up slowly. I picked up my cap and tucked it under my arm. I smoothed the front of my uniform. I turned to look at Vincent one last time. He looked up at me, his eyes red and filled with hatred and confusion. How? He whispered. I didn't say a word. I just adjusted my tie, squared my shoulders, and gave him a smile. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a sniper who had waited days in the tall grass for the perfect shot and had just watched the target fall. I turned on my heel and marched out of the courtroom, leaving the wreckage behind me. Mission accomplished. The Virginia sun was beating down on the asphalt of the courthouse parking lot, baking the world in a humid haze. It was the kind of heat that made you sweat just by standing still, but Vincent didn't seem to notice. He was running. He was chasing after Brittany, his expensive Italian loafers slapping against the pavement. "Brittany, baby, wait!" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "It is just a misunderstanding. I can fix this. Talk to the lawyers." Brittany stopped near the curb where a sleek black SUV was idling. She turned around slowly. The bubbly, trad wife influencer who posted videos about baking sourdough bread and submitting to her man was gone. In her place stood a woman with eyes as cold as a serpent. She looked Vincent up and down, curling her lip in pure disgust. "Fix it," she laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "You are negative $1.9 million in the hole, Vincent. You don't fix that. You drown in it." "But our plans," Vincent stammered, reaching for her arm. "Cabo, the house." She recoiled from his touch as if he were contagious. "You think I'm going to stay and ruin my credit score for you? You think I'm going to scrub toilets in a foreclosure because I love you?" She dug into her designer purse and pulled out the spare key to the Mercedes G-Wagon, the car she drove, but my name was never on. She threw the heavy fob right at his face. It struck his cheek with a dull thud and clattered to the ground. "I spent 6 months of my prime years curating an image with you," she hissed. "And for what? To end up with a broke loser? You are pathetic." She opened the door of the Uber Black. "Drive," she commanded the driver, not even looking back as the car peeled away, leaving Vincent standing alone, sweating and trembling in the exhaust fumes. But the nightmare was only beginning. By the time Vincent got back to the mansion, his mansion now, reality had arrived ahead of him. A massive flatbed tow truck was backed into the driveway. A burly man in a neon vest was hooking chains onto the front axle of the Mercedes G-Wagon. "Hey!" Vincent screamed, running up the driveway. "Hey, that is my car. Unhook it right now. Do you know who I am?" The repo man didn't even pause. He just spat on the ground and yanked the lever. The hydraulics whined and the luxury SUV lifted into the air. "I know who you are, Mr. Mercer," the man said, bored. "You are the guy who hasn't made a payment in 4 months. Bank issued the order an hour ago. They move fast when they smell blood." Vincent watched helplessly as his status symbol was dragged away. He turned to go inside, needing a drink, but stopped dead. Taped to the front door, the grand double oak doors he was so proud of, was a bright orange notice. Notice of seizure and foreclosure. His empire hadn't just cracked, it had evaporated. Vincent stumbled back to his own car, realizing he couldn't even go inside the house he had fought so hard to keep. He drove to the nearest liquor store, his hands shaking so badly he could barely steer. He grabbed a bottle of scotch and threw his credit card on the counter. "Chip reader is finicky," the clerk muttered, inserting the card. "Beep, beep, beep." "Declined," the clerk said. "Try it again," Vincent snapped. "It is a platinum Amex." "It says card canceled by issuer, buddy," the clerk said, pulling the bottle back. "You got cash? No? Then get out." My phone rang as I was driving my Ford F-150 down the interstate, putting miles between me and that toxic life. The dashboard display flashed a name I used to dread: Lorraine Mercer. I answered on the speakerphone, keeping my eyes on the road. "Heidi?" "Oh, thank God," Lorraine's voice filled the cab. She wasn't the haughty matriarch who had thrown my medals in the trash anymore. She was sobbing, hysterical. "Heidi, you have to help us. The bank is taking the house. They took the car. Vincent is... He's sitting on the curb crying. He has nowhere to go." I adjusted my rearview mirror, watching the open road behind me. "That sounds like a difficult situation, Lorraine." "Difficult? It is a disaster," she wailed. "You can't let this happen. You are his wife. We are family. You have to co-sign a loan. Just something to get the liens off so we can sell the house properly. Please, Heidi, be the bigger person." I let a small dry chuckle escape my lips. "The bigger person," I repeated. "Lorraine, do you remember last weekend when you called me a rough soldier and threw my service uniform in the garbage? You said I lacked class." I was stressed," she stammered. "I didn't mean it." Yes, you did, I said calmly. And you were right about one thing. I'm just a rough soldier. I don't have that fancy old money you love so much. I can't help you. Heidi, please. Ask Brittany to sell her Hermes collection, I suggested coldly. I hear the resale value on Birkin bags is excellent. That should cover a month of rent for you two. I pressed the red button on the steering wheel. Then I navigated to the contact settings and hit block caller. One more loose end remained. 10 minutes later, my phone pinged with a text. It was Diane. I pulled into a rest stop to read it. The message was a wall of frantic text. Heidi, you have to talk to him. Vincent is going crazy. He just called me screaming. He said he is going to sue me for fraud and collusion. He said I fed him bad intel. He's threatening to drag me to court. You have to tell him I was just trying to help. We are friends, right? I was just trying to mediate. Help me. I looked at the screen. The audacity was breathtaking. She had sold me out for a promise of cash, and now that the buyer was bankrupt, she wanted a refund on her loyalty. I didn't type a reply. I didn't engage. I simply opened my photo gallery. I selected the screenshot I'd taken days ago, the one of her text message to Vincent on the iPad, where she called me weak and demanded her fee. I sent the image to her. Then I typed 3 words, a final military transmission to signify the absolute end of communication. Over and out. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The silence that filled the truck wasn't lonely. It was clean. It was the sound of the trash taking itself out. But as the adrenaline faded, I didn't feel joy. I felt a heavy, hollow ache in my chest. I had won the war. Yes, I had destroyed the enemy. But victory in divorce is a Pyrrhic victory. I was free, but I was alone. And somewhere in that wreckage was a 12-year-old boy who had watched his hero crumble. I put the truck in gear. The real mission was just starting. I had to go get my son. The summer storm broke over Northern Virginia late that evening, a relentless pounding downpour that turned the world outside into a gray blur. I was standing in the living room of my new apartment in Alexandria. It was not a mansion. It was a modest 2-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor of a quiet complex, with beige carpets and a small galley kitchen. But for the first time in 15 years, the air inside did not smell of expensive pretension and hidden fear. It smelled of lemon polish and peace. I was unpacking a box of books, placing them on a shelf, when the doorbell rang. I frowned, checking the clock on the microwave. It was past 9 o'clock at night. I was not expecting anyone. My first instinct, honed by years of living with a volatile man, was defensive. I moved to the door and peered through the peephole. My heart stopped in my chest. I threw the deadbolt and yanked the door open. Tyler was standing on the welcome mat. He was soaking wet, shivering violently. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his clothes clung to his skinny frame like a second skin. He looked like a stray kitten that had been kicked out into the cold. Gone was the arrogant posture he had mimicked from his father for the last 6 months. Gone was the sneer. And conspicuously absent was the shiny iPhone Pro Max that had been glued to his hand. He was just wearing his school backpack, clutching the straps with white knuckles as if they were the only things holding him upright. Tyler, I breathed, pulling him inside instantly. Oh my God, honey, come in. He stood in the middle of my small living room, dripping water onto the carpet. He did not seem to notice the modest furniture or the boxes. He just looked at me with eyes rimmed red from crying. Mom! His voice cracked, a broken sound that tore my heart in two. Dad sold my phone. He tried to sell my gaming computer too. He was screaming. He said you stole all the money. He said you stole my money. He looked up at me, terrified. Is it true? Did you steal from me? I did not get angry. I did not launch into a defense or badmouth his father. I looked at my son, a boy who had been used as a pawn in a war he did not understand, and I saw the confusion. Take off those wet clothes, I said softly. Wrap up in this towel. Meet me in the kitchen. 5 minutes later, he was sitting at the small round table, wrapped in a fluffy bath towel, holding a steaming mug of hot cocoa with extra marshmallows, just the way he liked it when he was 5 years old. I sat down across from him. I placed a thick, bound document on the table between us. Tyler, look at this. He hesitated, his hand shaking as he reached out. He opened the folder. It was a quarterly statement from Vanguard. Read the bottom line, I instructed gently. He squinted at the numbers. Account type, 529 College Savings Plan. Beneficiary, Tyler Mercer. His eyes widened as he read the total balance. $520,000. He looked up at me, his mouth gaping. Mom, you have $500,000? No, I corrected him, reaching across the table to cover his cold hand with mine. You have $500,000. I started this account the day you were born. Every time I said no to a new toy, every time I wore the same boots for 3 years instead of buying new ones, every overtime shift I worked at the depot, every single dollar went in here. I took a deep breath, looking into his eyes. I did not steal your money, Tyler. I hid it. I locked it away in a trust where your father could not touch it. Because I knew if he saw it, he would spend it on cars and watches. This is your future. This is Harvard. This is Yale. This is whatever you want to be. Tyler looked back down at the paper. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He thought about the $15,000 Vincent had drained to buy a Hermes bag for Brittany. He thought about the years he called me cheap and boring, while I was silently building him a fortress of security. His face crumpled. The bravado dissolved, leaving only a 12-year-old boy who realized he had been cheering for the villain. I am sorry, he sobbed, the tears falling fast and hot into his cocoa. I am so sorry, Mom. I was so mean to you. I chose them. I chose the fun stuff. I am so stupid. He launched himself out of the chair and into my arms. I caught him, burying my face in his damp hair that smelled of rain and boyish sweat. He clung to me with a desperation I had not felt since he was a toddler. Shh, I whispered, rocking him back and forth. It is okay. You were a child. You were dazzled. It happens to the best of us. I don't want to go back there, he cried into my shoulder. He's scary now. Please don't make me go back. You are never going back there if you don't want to, I promised, tightening my hold. You are here with me. We are a team. I pulled back slightly to look him in the eye, wiping a tear from his cheek with my thumb. In the Army, we have a code. We never leave a fallen comrade behind. You stumbled, soldier. But I have got you. I will always come back for you. Late that night, I stood in the doorway of the second bedroom. Tyler was fast asleep on the new mattress I had bought just yesterday, almost as if my mother's intuition knew he was coming home. His breathing was deep and even, the stress of the last few months erased from his face. I walked over and pulled the quilt up to his chin, smoothing a stray hair from his forehead. I had destroyed Vincent in court. I had secured my financial freedom. But looking at my sleeping son, safe and sound, I realized that those were just skirmishes. This was the victory. I walked back to my own room and turned off the light. For the first time in years, the silence was not lonely. It was complete. Tomorrow would be hard. We had to rebuild trust. We had to heal wounds. But tonight, the perimeter was secure. My squad was back together. And that was all that mattered. 3 months had passed since the gavel fell in that courtroom, and my life had transformed from a battlefield into a sanctuary. I sat at my drafting table, the morning sun streaming through the large windows of my Alexandria apartment. The light here was different. It wasn't filtered through heavy velvet drapes meant to impress neighbors we didn't like. It was raw, warm, and unfiltered. The walls, which had been a generic rental beige when I moved in, were now painted a soft, calming shade of sage green. It was the color of healing, of new growth. Potted plants, snake plants, ferns, and a tall fiddle leaf fig occupied every sunny corner. Vincent had always forbidden real plants in the mansion. He said they were dirty and might ruin the Persian rugs. Now, my home breathed with life. On the table in front of me lay a scattering of sketches and color swatches, not legal bills or foreclosure notices. I picked up a charcoal pencil and shaded the curve of a staircase I was designing. At 34, I had finally enrolled in the professional interior design certification program I had abandoned 15 years ago to become a supportive wife. I wasn't just Sergeant Foster anymore. I was a student. I was an artist. I was free. Mom, check this out. I looked up toward the kitchen island. Tyler was sitting on a bar stool, his legs swinging rhythmically. He wasn't hunched over a screen, lost in a digital void. He was holding up a history paper, a genuine grin stretching across his face. I got an A on the Civil War project, he announced proudly. Mr. Henderson said my analysis of the supply lines was insightful. I told him my mom is a logistics expert, so I know how important beans and bullets are. I laughed, the sound bubbling up effortlessly. That is my boy. Logistics win wars, Tyler. Never forget that. I walked over to the oven and pulled out a tray of chocolate chip cookies. The scent of melted chocolate, brown sugar, and vanilla instantly filled the small space, pushing out the phantom memories of stale cigar smoke and Brittany's cloying perfume. This was the smell of a home that was actually lived in. This was the smell of peace. Careful, they are hot, I warned, sliding a cookie onto a napkin for him. He took a bite, closing his eyes in dramatic ecstasy. Worth the burn, he mumbled. We were laughing about his teacher's terrible tie collection when a knock echoed through the apartment. It was a heavy, hesitant sound. I frowned. It was late afternoon, and I wasn't expecting packages. I walked to the door, my instincts shifting from mother back to guardian. I stood on my toes and looked through the peephole. The figure standing in the hallway was familiar, yet shockingly foreign. It was Vincent, but it wasn't the Vincent who wore tailored Italian suits and checked his reflection in every shop window. This man was gaunt, his cheeks hollowed out. His face was covered in a patchy, unkempt beard that was graying at the chin. He was wearing a navy suit jacket that I recognized, but it was wrinkled and stained, hanging loosely off his frame. He looked like a ghost haunting the site of his former life. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door, but I didn't unhook the security chain. I stood in the gap, blocking his view of my sanctuary. Vincent, I said. My voice was even, devoid of the fear that used to strangle me. Heidi, he croaked. His eyes were bloodshot, darting around the hallway as if he were being hunted. Heidi, please. Can I come in? Just for a minute? It is so hot out there. No, I said simply. What do you want? He slumped against the doorframe, letting out a ragged sigh. I have lost everything, Heidi. The business is gone. The house is boarded up. My friends, those traitors won't return my calls. Even my mother went to stay with her sister in Florida and told me to figure it out. He looked at me, summoning a weak, manipulative smile that used to work on me a decade ago. I have been sleeping in my car for 3 nights. They towed the Mercedes, so I am in an old Civic I bought for cash. It is humiliating. Heidi, look at us. We were married for 15 years. You can't just look at me and let me starve. Do you remember how much we used to love each other? I looked at him. I really looked at him. I waited for the anger to rise. I waited for the urge to scream at him for the affair, for the theft of Tyler's college fund, for the years of emotional abuse. But nothing came. The anger had evaporated, leaving behind only a dull, distant pity. He wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a sad, broken man who had believed his own lies. I remember that I loved you, I corrected him softly. I remember that you loved yourself. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. I didn't do it because I owed him anything. I didn't do it because I was weak. I did it because I was strong enough to show mercy to a defeated enemy without letting him back inside the perimeter. I pulled out a single $100 bill. Here, I said, extending it through the gap in the door. Vincent stared at the money, his pride warring with his desperation. Desperation won. He snatched the bill from my fingers with a trembling hand. This isn't alimony, Vincent, I said, my voice sharp and final. And this isn't a loan for a husband. This is charity for a homeless man I used to know. Take it. Go buy a decent meal. Get a shower at a motel. He nodded, clutching the bill, refusing to meet my eyes. And Vincent, I added, making him look at me. Do not come back here. This base is closed to enemy combatants. If you show up again, I will call the police. Thank you, he mumbled, turning away. I watched him walk down the hallway, his shoulders hunched, a shadow of the man who used to terrorize my world. I closed the door. Click! The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was crisp and decisive. It sounded like the period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. I turned back to the living room. The sun was still shining on the sage-green walls. The smell of cookies was still warm in the air. Tyler was still humming a tune as he worked on his history project. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet oxygen of freedom. The past was on the other side of that door. My life was right here. It had been exactly 1 year since the storm, and the Virginia autumn was putting on a spectacular show. The maple trees lining the streets of Old Town Alexandria were exploding in shades of crimson and gold, the crisp air biting at my cheeks as I stood on the sidewalk. I looked up at the small hand-painted wooden sign hanging above the door. Foster Interiors, Healing Spaces. It wasn't a skyscraper in Tyson's Corner. It wasn't a real estate empire built on debt and deceit. It was a modest studio with big windows and the smell of fresh paint and possibility. My business model was simple. I helped single mothers and women starting over after divorce to reclaim their homes. I showed them how to turn a depressing rental into a sanctuary on a shoestring budget. I gave them back the one thing their trauma had stolen: control over their own environment. My first client of the day, a young woman named Sarah, walked out shaking my hand. "Thank you, Heidi," she said, clutching the design plans I'd drawn up for her studio apartment. I didn't think I could afford to make it look nice. After that developer stole my deposit, I squeezed her hand. "The developer in Tyson's?" "Yeah," she sighed. "Mercer Holdings. I heard the guy went bankrupt and skipped town, but that doesn't get my money back." I smiled, a genuine warm smile. The circle of karma was complete. Vincent had hurt this woman, so I would heal her home for free. "Don't worry about the consultation fee, Sarah," I said. "Consider it paid in full. Just go paint those walls sage green." That evening, the apartment was filled with the smell of roasting chicken and rosemary. Tyler was sitting at the kitchen island, but he wasn't playing video games. He was waiting for me, bouncing his leg with nervous energy. He slid a piece of paper across the granite counter. It had a gold foil seal embossed on the top right corner. "First place, district essay contest." "I wanted you to read it first," he mumbled, suddenly shy. "Before the ceremony tomorrow." The title of the essay was typed in bold, 12-point font: "The Soldier Without a Gun." I sat down and began to read. "My hero does not wear a cape," Tyler had written. "She doesn't fly, and she does not have super strength. For most of my life, my hero wore a uniform, stained with engine oil and hydraulic fluid. She smelled like hard work. She came home tired every day because she was fighting a war I didn't know about." My vision blurred. I blinked rapidly to clear the tears. Most soldiers fight monsters with guns. My mother fought the monsters of lies and greed with silence and patience. She taught me that true strength isn't about shouting the loudest or having the most expensive car. True strength is protecting the people you love, even when they are too blind to see it. She saved my future not by fighting with fists, but by loving me enough to plan for a battle I didn't even know was coming. A tear splashed onto the paper, right next to the gold seal. I had received the Army Commendation Medal. I had earned ribbons for service in desert war zones. I had been recognized by generals. But this piece of paper written by a 13-year-old boy in a public school district contest was the highest honor of my life. It was the only medal that truly mattered. "Tyler," I whispered, looking up at him. He didn't say anything. He just came around the counter and hugged me, burying his face in my neck. He was taller now, almost as tall as me. The boy was becoming a man, and he was becoming a good one. Later that night, I stood before the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I wasn't wearing my Army combat uniform. I wasn't wearing the stiff, formal dress blues. I was wearing a navy blue silk dress that flowed over my body like water. It was soft. It was elegant. It was undeniably feminine. Next to the mirror, framed on the wall, was an old photo of Sergeant Foster in full tactical gear, holding an M4 carbine, her face set in stone. For years, Vincent had told me I had to choose. He said I was too much man to be a woman. He said my discipline made me cold. He said I couldn't be a soldier and a mother. He was wrong. I touched the cool silk of my dress, then looked at the steel in the eyes of the woman in the photograph. I didn't have to choose. The discipline of the soldier was what protected the heart of the mother. The steel was the frame that held the silk together. I was both. I was the shield and the hearth. I turned off the bedroom light and walked to the window, looking out over the quiet street below. The leaves were falling, covering the ground in a blanket of change. They say women are the weaker sex. They say we need men to build our castles and sign our checks. They say that without a husband, a woman is incomplete. They are wrong. Women are the architects of life. We take the broken bricks of our trauma and we build fortresses. We take the ashes of our burnt-out lives and we mix them into mortar. Vincent tried to take everything from me, but he forgot the most important rule of engagement. You cannot steal a kingdom from the woman who built it with her own hands. He took the debt. He took the shame. I kept the future. I smiled, watching a single autumn leaf drift past the glass, dancing in the wind, completely free. Mission accomplished, I whispered into the darkness, returning to base. If there is one lesson I want you to take away from my journey today, it is this. Financial literacy is the highest form of self-defense. For years, I was gaslighted into believing I was cheap or boring. But that discipline was the only shield that saved my son's future when the roof caved in. Ladies and gentlemen, do not let anyone, spouse, partner, or family member, keep you in the dark about your own life. Trust but verify isn't just a military doctrine. It is essential for your survival. Remember, silence and strategy will always defeat noise and ego. It is never too late to reinvent yourself. You can build a palace from the bricks others threw at you. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to restart your life from scratch when everyone else counted you out? Or maybe you have successfully dealt with a Vincent or a Diane in your own circle. I read every single comment, so please share your story below. Your experience might be the flashlight that helps someone else find their way out of the dark. If you found satisfaction in seeing justice served today, please smash that like button and subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a mission. Remember, you are the architect of your own story. Until next time, stay strong.